March 15, 2018. The small town of Ashland, Oregon, nestled in the shadow of the Cascade Mountains, would become the unlikely stage for a mystery that would challenge everything the local authorities thought they knew about crime investigation. The Ashland Historical Museum, a modest two-story building that had stood on Main Street for over 60 years, housed artifacts that told the story of the region's pioneer past. That Thursday morning, museum director Catherine Morrison arrived at work at her usual time, 7:30, to prepare for the day's scheduled school visits. Catherine had managed the museum for nearly 15 years. Her routine was precise, almost ritualistic. She would unlock the front entrance, disable the security system, and walk through each exhibition room to ensure everything remained in its proper place. But on this particular morning, something felt different. The air inside seemed heavier somehow, though nothing appeared visibly disturbed. "So glad to have you here. Comment your city so I can bring cases from your region and also know where you're watching me from." It wasn't until she reached the second floor that Catherine's instincts proved correct. The glass display case containing the museum's prized collection of 19th-century gold coins stood exactly where it had always been. The case itself showed no signs of damage. The lock appeared intact, but the velvet-lined interior that had held 43 rare coins, valued at over $80,000, now lay completely empty. Catherine's hands trembled as she reached for her phone to contact the police. Within 20 minutes, Detective Patrick Sullivan arrived with his team. Sullivan, a veteran investigator with 22 years of experience, immediately began documenting the scene. His initial assessment raised more questions than answers. The security system showed no breaches. The doors and windows remained locked from the inside. The cameras had recorded nothing unusual during the night. It was as if the coins had simply vanished into thin air. The investigation team spent hours examining every inch of the museum. They dusted for fingerprints, checked for signs of forced entry, and interviewed staff members. The museum employed only 5 people: Catherine, 2 part-time docents, a bookkeeper, and Michael Rhodes, the janitor who had worked there for 3 years. Each person provided statements and alibis. Each person appeared cooperative and genuinely shocked by the theft. Detective Sullivan reviewed the security footage multiple times. The cameras covered the main entrance, the exhibition halls, and the storage areas. Nothing seemed out of place. The last person to leave the building the previous evening had been Catherine herself at 6:15. The first person to arrive that morning had also been Catherine. The timeline offered no obvious gaps or inconsistencies. By late afternoon, the initial investigation had produced frustratingly little evidence. No fingerprints beyond those of staff members who regularly handled the display cases. No tool marks. No disturbances in the dust patterns around the exhibits. It was as clean as any crime scene Sullivan had ever encountered. Perhaps too clean. The local newspaper ran the story the following day. Television news crews from nearby cities arrived to film segments about the mysterious theft. For a small town like Ashland, such attention was unusual and unwelcome. The museum closed temporarily while the investigation continued, disappointing dozens of school groups that had planned educational visits. Among those disappointed groups was Mrs. Jennifer Palmer's 5th grade class from Ashland Elementary School. The students had been preparing for their museum visit for weeks, researching local history and creating presentations about pioneer life. When the trip was canceled, several students felt particularly let down. 3 of them, however, would not let their disappointment end there. Emma Taylor, 11 years old, had always been fascinated by mysteries. Her bedroom shelves overflowed with detective novels and true crime books. Noah Bennett, 10, possessed an unusual talent for noticing details others missed, a trait his teachers often remarked upon. Sophia Carter, also 11, had recently received a camera for her birthday and had been documenting everything around her, developing what her father called an artist's eye for composition and detail. When the museum finally reopened 2 weeks after the theft, Mrs. Palmer rescheduled the class visit. The students arrived on a gray Tuesday morning, filing through the familiar rooms with renewed interest. The empty display case on the second floor drew everyone's attention. Museum staff had placed a small placard explaining that the coins were temporarily removed. Most students glanced at the empty case and moved on, but Emma, Noah, and Sophia lingered. Something about the scene didn't feel right to them, though they couldn't immediately articulate what bothered them. They took their time examining the area, noting details, asking questions that their teacher and the museum guide struggled to answer. As the class moved to the next exhibition, the three friends exchanged meaningful glances. They had all noticed the same thing. This crime scene was hiding secrets that no one else seemed interested in uncovering. What they didn't know yet was that their casual observations during a school field trip would unravel a conspiracy far more complex than anyone in Ashland could have imagined. The following Saturday morning, Emma Taylor sat at her family's kitchen table with a notebook open in front of her, writing down everything she remembered from the museum visit. Her parents assumed she was working on a school assignment, which wasn't entirely untrue. Emma had always been the kind of child who needed to understand how things worked, who asked why when others simply accepted what they were told. She documented her observations methodically. The display case had been on the second floor, positioned near a window that overlooked the back alley. During the tour, she had noticed something peculiar about that window. While all the other windows in the museum featured old-fashioned brass latches that showed years of oxidation and wear, this particular window's latch appeared newer, shinier. More significantly, fine scratches marked the wood around the latch, scratches that looked recent compared to the aged patina of the surrounding windowsill. Noah Bennett spent his Saturday morning differently. He had convinced his father to drive past the museum so he could observe the building from the outside. Noah's attention to detail extended beyond what most people considered normal observation. He noticed patterns, inconsistencies, things that didn't quite fit. As his father waited patiently in the car, Noah walked slowly along the sidewalk, studying the museum's exterior. The building sat on a corner lot with the main entrance facing Main Street and a service entrance in the back alley. A small parking area behind the museum accommodated staff vehicles. Noah counted 3 security cameras visible from the street, their positions covering the obvious entry points. But the second-floor window that overlooked the alley, the one Emma had noticed during their visit, appeared to fall into a blind spot between 2 camera angles. Sophia Carter had a different approach. She spent her Saturday reviewing photographs she had taken during the museum visit. Her new camera had become an extension of her vision, helping her see the world through a more analytical lens. As she scrolled through the images on her computer, she paused at a photo she had taken while waiting for the class to move from one room to another. The image captured the museum's back hallway, where a utility closet door stood partially open. In the background, barely visible, was Michael Rhodes, the janitor, speaking with someone Sophia didn't recognize. The man appeared to be in his 50s, wearing a casual jacket and carrying what looked like a clipboard or folder. What struck Sophia as odd was Michael's body language in the photograph. His shoulders were hunched, his posture defensive, and his expression seemed anxious or uncomfortable. By Monday afternoon, the 3 friends had arranged to meet at the public library after school. They chose a quiet corner table and shared their individual observations. Emma showed her notes about the window latch. Noah produced a hand-drawn map of the museum's exterior, marking camera positions and potential blind spots. Sophia pulled up her photographs on her tablet, zooming in on the image of Michael Rhodes and the unidentified man. The pieces didn't form a complete picture yet, but patterns were beginning to emerge. Emma suggested they needed to learn more about the museum's security system and staff routines. Noah proposed observing the area at different times to understand the normal patterns of activity. Sophia volunteered to research whether any businesses near the museum might have security cameras that captured different angles. They agreed on ground rules. They would not trespass on private property. They would not interfere with the official police investigation. They would not take unnecessary risks. Their goal was simply to gather information that might help solve the mystery, information that adults might have overlooked because children often see the world differently. Over the next 2 weeks, the 3 friends pursued their independent research. Emma learned that Michael Rhodes had worked at the museum for 3 years, always receiving positive performance reviews. She discovered this information through her mother, who served on the museum's board of trustees. Casual dinner conversation provided valuable intelligence. Noah established a routine of walking past the museum each day after school, always at slightly different times. He documented vehicle traffic, delivery schedules, and patterns of pedestrian movement. He noticed that a white commercial van regularly parked in the alley behind the museum, usually late in the afternoon. The van's side panel displayed the logo of Hartford Antiques, a business located in the neighboring town of Medford, 30 miles away. Sophia discovered that the coffee shop across the street from the museum maintained security cameras that faced outward toward the street. After explaining to the owner that she was working on a school project about local businesses, she received permission to review archived footage from the week before the theft. The owner, charmed by her politeness and genuine interest, allowed her to sit in the back office for an hour, scrolling through digital recordings. What Sophia found in that footage would change everything. On 3 separate evenings during the week before the coins disappeared, the white Hartford Antiques van had parked behind the museum well after closing time. On 2 of those occasions, a man matching the description of the person in Sophia's photograph emerged from the museum's back entrance, spent approximately 10 minutes at the van, then returned inside the building. The timestamp on the footage indicated these visits occurred between 8 and 9 in the evening, long after the museum's 6 o'clock closing time. Yet the security system reports that Detective Sullivan had reviewed showed no record of anyone entering or exiting the building during those hours. When Sophia shared this discovery with Emma and Noah, the implications became clear. Someone had access to the museum after hours. Someone who could move freely without triggering the security system. Someone who might have had help from the inside. The 3 friends now faced a decision. They had uncovered information that seemed significant, potentially crucial to solving the case. But they were just children. Would anyone take them seriously? Would they be dismissed as overly imaginative kids playing detective? And more troubling, if they were right about their suspicions, were they getting dangerously close to people who had already proven willing to commit serious crimes? As they sat together in Emma's bedroom that evening, reviewing everything they had learned, none of them could have predicted just how deep this conspiracy actually ran, or how many other crimes their investigation was about to expose. April 2nd, 2018. 3 weeks had passed since the theft at the Ashland Historical Museum, and the official investigation had reached what Detective Patrick Sullivan privately acknowledged as a dead end. The case remained open, but active leads had dried up. The insurance company had begun processing the claim for the stolen coins. Life in Ashland was slowly returning to normal, but for Emma Taylor, Noah Bennett, and Sophia Carter, the investigation was just beginning to reveal its true complexity. The 3 friends had compiled their findings into an organized folder that Emma kept hidden under her bed. Photographs, timelines, maps, and notes filled the pages. What had started as curiosity had evolved into something more serious. They now possessed evidence that suggested the theft involved careful planning, inside assistance, and connections that extended beyond Ashland's borders. Noah had continued his systematic observation of the Hartford Antiques van. He noticed the vehicle appeared in the alley behind the museum every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, always between 4 and 4:30. The timing was precise, almost ritualistic. Noah began to wonder if these visits were related to the museum's regular schedule of events or staff rotations. Through careful research at the library, using public internet computers to avoid leaving traces on their home devices, Emma discovered concerning information about Hartford Antiques and its owner, James Hartford. News archives from 5 years earlier revealed that Hartford had been questioned by police in connection with a case involving stolen artwork from a private collection in Sacramento, California. No charges were ever filed due to insufficient evidence, but the investigation had focused on whether Hartford's business served as a front for laundering stolen goods. This discovery transformed their theory from simple theft to something far more organized. If James Hartford was involved, and if he had a history of dealing with stolen items, then the museum robbery might be part of a larger operation. The 3 friends realized they were no longer looking at an isolated incident, but potentially at a criminal network that had operated undetected for years. Sophia had expanded her photography surveillance to include the Hartford Antiques shop itself. On 2 separate Saturday afternoons, she convinced her father to drive to Medford under the pretense of wanting to explore antique stores for a school art project. While her father browsed neighboring shops, Sophia positioned herself across the street from Hartford Antiques with her camera, documenting everyone who entered and exited. The results were striking. Among the customers she photographed was Michael Rhodes, the museum janitor, visiting the shop on a Saturday when he should have been at work in Ashland. Sophia captured images of Michael entering the store at 2:15 and emerging 40 minutes later, carrying nothing but looking visibly agitated. His body language suggested stress, anxiety, or fear. Emma used her mother's position on the museum board to gather additional information about Michael Rhodes without raising suspicion. Through casual conversations at dinner, she learned that Michael had financial difficulties. Her mother mentioned, almost in passing, that Michael had recently requested an advance on his salary, citing unexpected medical expenses. Emma also discovered that Michael had been working extra hours at the museum, often volunteering to stay late for special events or to complete maintenance projects. These extra hours provided the perfect cover for after-hours access to the building. If Michael was involved in the theft, his presence late in the evening would not arouse suspicion. He could disable security cameras, unlock doors, and provide access to accomplices, all while maintaining the appearance of dedicated employee performing his duties. Noah made another crucial observation during his surveillance. He noticed that on the evenings when the Hartford Antiques van appeared behind the museum, Michael Rhodes's car remained in the staff parking lot long after closing time. By cross-referencing the dates from Sophia's coffee shop footage with Noah's observations, they identified a clear pattern. Every visit from the Hartford van coincided with Michael working late. The three friends now faced a dilemma. They had assembled evidence that strongly suggested a connection between Michael Rhodes and James Hartford, evidence that pointed toward the museum janitor's involvement in the theft. But they still lacked proof of the actual crime. They knew where to look and whom to suspect, but they had no way to access the kind of evidence that would convince the police to reopen their investigation with new focus. Emma proposed a bold idea. They needed to document their findings in a comprehensive report, complete with photographs, timelines, and detailed observations. Then they would need to find a trusted adult who would take them seriously and help them present their evidence to Detective Sullivan. The question was whom to trust. After considerable debate, they decided to approach Rebecca Palmer, Emma's fifth-grade teacher. Mrs. Palmer had a reputation for taking her students seriously and for encouraging critical thinking. More importantly, she had connections in the community and would understand how to navigate the complex social dynamics of bringing sensitive information to law enforcement. On a Wednesday afternoon in early April, the three friends stayed after school and presented their findings to Mrs. Palmer. They spread their documentation across her desk and walked her through their investigation step by step. Mrs. Palmer listened without interruption, her expression growing increasingly serious as the evidence mounted. What the teacher saw disturbed her. These children had uncovered connections that the police had apparently missed or dismissed. The implications were significant not just for solving the museum theft, but for potentially exposing a much larger criminal operation. Mrs. Palmer understood that this information needed to reach Detective Sullivan, but she also recognized that the children had placed themselves in a potentially dangerous position. If Michael Rhodes and James Hartford were indeed involved in criminal activity, and if they discovered that three children had been investigating them, the consequences could be severe. Mrs. Palmer made an immediate decision. She would contact Detective Sullivan that evening and arrange a meeting where the children could present their findings under adult supervision and protection. But what none of them knew yet was that their investigation had not gone entirely unnoticed. Someone had been watching the children just as carefully as they had been watching the museum, and that someone was preparing to take action to protect secrets that went far deeper than anyone in Ashland could have imagined. April 10, 2018. Detective Patrick Sullivan sat in Rebecca Palmer's classroom after school hours, reviewing the materials that three fifth-grade students had compiled over the past month. His initial skepticism had been obvious when Mrs. Palmer first contacted him, but his expression had changed dramatically as Emma, Noah, and Sophia presented their findings. What lay before him was not the work of imaginative children playing detective, but a carefully documented investigation that revealed patterns and connections his own team had failed to identify. Sullivan examined Sophia's photographs with particular interest. The images of Michael Rhodes visiting Hartford Antiques, the timestamps from the coffee shop security footage showing the white van's suspicious pattern of visits, and Noah's detailed maps of the museum's security blind spots painted a compelling picture. The detective had to acknowledge, albeit reluctantly, that these children had accomplished something remarkable. The detective's next steps were methodical and professional. He could not launch a formal investigation based solely on observations made by minors, but he could use their information as a starting point for official police work. Sullivan obtained warrants to review cell phone records for Michael Rhodes, searching for communication patterns with James Hartford. He also requested permission to examine the museum's complete security system, not just the recorded footage, but the system's technical specifications and access logs. What Sullivan discovered validated the children's suspicions in ways that were both impressive and deeply troubling. Michael Rhodes's phone records showed numerous calls to a number registered to Hartford Antiques, with communication frequency increasing significantly in the 3 months before the theft. More damning, the museum's security system access logs revealed that Michael had administrative privileges that allowed him to temporarily disable specific cameras without leaving obvious traces in the standard monitoring reports. This technical capability explained why the security footage showed no evidence of the crime. Michael had the knowledge and access to create temporary blind spots in the surveillance system, windows of time during which he could move freely without being recorded. The system would show no error messages, no gaps in the timeline, nothing that would alert Catherine Morrison or the security company that monitored the feeds remotely. Sullivan expanded his investigation to include James Hartford and the antiques business in Medford. Background checks revealed that Hartford had connections to several individuals with criminal records related to theft, fraud, and trafficking in stolen goods. The business itself operated with minimal oversight, dealing primarily in cash transactions that made tracking the origin of items extremely difficult. The detective obtained a warrant to place surveillance on Hartford Antiques. Over the course of 1 week, undercover officers documented a steady stream of visitors to the shop, many of whom arrived outside regular business hours. License plate checks revealed that several of these individuals had previous convictions for burglary or had been questioned in connection with unsolved theft cases throughout Oregon and Northern California. The pattern suggested that Hartford Antiques served as more than a legitimate business. It appeared to function as a clearinghouse for stolen goods, with James Hartford acting as a middleman between thieves and collectors willing to purchase items without asking inconvenient questions about provenance. On April 15th, Sullivan made the decision to execute search warrants simultaneously at Hartford Antiques in Medford and at Michael Rhodes's residence in Ashland. The coordinated operation involved officers from both jurisdictions and was planned for early morning when targets would likely be at home and unprepared. The search of Michael Rhodes's apartment produced immediate results. Officers discovered detailed floor plans of the Ashland Historical Museum, including handwritten notes about security camera positions and blind spots. They found a ledger documenting financial transactions, including a payment of $15,000 received 2 weeks after the museum theft. Most significantly, they recovered keys that matched the museum's back entrance and maintenance areas, keys that Michael should not have possessed outside of work hours. The search of Hartford Antiques was even more revealing. In a locked storage room accessible only through the main office, officers found items that matched descriptions of objects reported stolen from museums and private collections across 3 states over the past 5 years. The inventory included not just the missing coins from Ashland, but also silverware from a historical society in Eugene, carved jade pieces from a gallery in Portland, and antique firearms from a museum in Eureka, California. What investigators discovered in Hartford's business records was equally damning. Detailed ledgers documented purchases of items at prices far below market value, with notes indicating sellers who required discretion and payment in cash. The records showed a sophisticated operation that had generated significant profits while staying just below the threshold of attention from law enforcement. James Hartford was arrested at his home that same morning. When confronted with the evidence recovered from his business, he initially refused to cooperate. But as the scope of the investigation became clear, and as prosecutors outlined the charges he would face, Hartford's resolve began to weaken. He was looking at decades in prison for multiple counts of trafficking stolen goods, conspiracy, and operating a criminal enterprise. Michael Rhodes, arrested simultaneously at his apartment, made a different calculation. Faced with overwhelming evidence and the prospect of a lengthy prison sentence, he agreed to provide a full statement in exchange for consideration during sentencing. What Rhodes revealed in his confession exposed the true scope of the operation. The museum theft had been planned 3 months in advance. Hartford had specifically recruited Rhodes after learning about the janitor's financial difficulties. The approach had been gradual and calculated. Hartford offered Rhodes small amounts of money initially, asking only for information about the museum's security systems and valuable items in the collection. By the time Hartford proposed the actual theft, Rhodes was already compromised and in debt to the criminal. The operation had been executed exactly as Emma, Noah, and Sophia had theorized. Rhodes disabled specific security cameras during his evening shift, creating a window during which Hartford and an associate entered through the back door. The theft itself took less than 20 minutes. The coins were removed carefully to avoid damage, and the display case was left intact to delay discovery. Rhodes reactivated the security system afterward, and the thieves departed without leaving obvious evidence. But the confession revealed something that shocked even Detective Sullivan. The Ashland Museum theft was not an isolated incident, but part of a pattern that had been ongoing for 5 years. Hartford had cultivated relationships with employees at multiple institutions, always targeting individuals with financial vulnerabilities or personal crises that made them susceptible to recruitment. The network had successfully stolen and sold items worth more than $2 million. As the full scope of the criminal enterprise became clear, prosecutors from multiple jurisdictions began coordinating efforts to build comprehensive cases against everyone involved. Additional arrests followed as investigators identified other employees who had assisted Hartford in thefts across the region. The 3 children who had started this investigation with simple observations during a school field trip had unknowingly unraveled a criminal network that had operated successfully for years. Their attention to detail, their refusal to accept the official narrative that the case was unsolvable, and their methodical approach to documenting evidence had accomplished what professional investigators had failed to achieve. But the story was far from over. The legal proceedings were just beginning, and the question of how to appropriately acknowledge the children's role in solving the case raised complex issues about their safety, privacy, and the precedent such recognition might set. The final chapter of this remarkable case would bring resolution, justice, and lessons that would resonate far beyond the small town of Ashland, Oregon. May 8, 2018. The Jackson County Courthouse in Medford, Oregon, became the center of unprecedented legal proceedings as prosecutors prepared cases against 17 individuals connected to what had become known as the Heritage Theft Network. The investigation that 3 elementary school students had initiated 2 months earlier had expanded into one of the largest art and antiquities theft prosecutions in Oregon's history. The scope of the criminal enterprise stunned even experienced law enforcement officials. Detective Patrick Sullivan coordinated with investigators from 6 different jurisdictions as they worked to identify victims, recover stolen property, and build cases against each defendant. The evidence seized from Hartford Antiques provided a roadmap to crimes spanning 5 years across 3 states. Each ledger entry represented not just a financial transaction, but a piece of history stolen from communities that valued their cultural heritage. James Hartford's detailed record-keeping, which he had maintained for tax evasion purposes, became the prosecution's most valuable asset. The ledgers documented purchases from employees at museums in Eugene, Portland, Sacramento, and a dozen smaller institutions. Each entry included dates, amounts paid, and descriptions of items acquired. Hartford had been meticulous in his documentation, never imagining that his own records would become evidence in his prosecution. The investigation revealed that Hartford's operation functioned with sophisticated efficiency. He specifically targeted small and medium-sized museums that lacked extensive security infrastructure and relied heavily on trust-based relationships with employees. His recruitment strategy focused on individuals facing financial hardship, personal crises, or workplace grievances that created vulnerability to manipulation. Michael Rhodes represented a typical case study in Hartford's methodology. The janitor had accumulated gambling debts of nearly $30,000, a burden that weighed heavily on someone earning a modest salary. Hartford had learned about Rhodes's financial problems through a network of informants who frequented casinos and reported on individuals displaying signs of desperation. The initial approach had been subtle, offering Rhodes small payments for seemingly innocent information about the museum's operations. By the time Hartford proposed the actual theft, Rhodes was already compromised. He had accepted money, provided information, and crossed ethical boundaries that made retreat psychologically difficult. Hartford had engineered a situation where the janitor felt he had no choice but to continue down the criminal path. This pattern repeated across multiple institutions, with Hartford identifying and exploiting vulnerable employees who provided him access to valuable collections. The recovery operation became a massive undertaking. Law enforcement agencies worked with curators and historians to identify stolen items found in Hartford's storage facilities, in the homes of collectors who had purchased from him, and in other antique shops where Hartford had placed items for consignment. More than 200 objects were ultimately recovered, including the 43 gold coins from the Ashland Historical Museum. Many items had traveled through multiple transactions after leaving Hartford's possession, creating complex chains of custody that required careful legal navigation. Some collectors who had purchased items in good faith faced the painful reality of surrendering objects they had believed were legitimately acquired. The legal principle that stolen property must be returned to rightful owners applied regardless of subsequent transactions, leading to financial losses for individuals who had unknowingly participated in Hartford's network. The human cost of the investigation extended beyond financial considerations. Employees who had assisted Hartford faced not just criminal charges, but professional ruin and community shame. Michael Rhodes, who had worked at the Ashland Museum for 3 years and had been well regarded by colleagues, now faced the collapse of his reputation and the prospect of prison time. His decision to cooperate with investigators would influence his sentencing, but it could not undo the damage to his life and relationships. Other employees arrested in the expanding investigation faced similar circumstances. A security guard in Eugene who had disabled cameras during a theft received a 5-year sentence. A collections manager in Portland, who provided Hartford with detailed inventories and access codes, was sentenced to 7 years. Each case represented an individual who had made catastrophic decisions that destroyed careers and damaged institutions that had trusted them. The legal proceedings moved forward through summer and fall of 2018. Hartford, facing overwhelming evidence and testimony from multiple co-conspirators, eventually accepted a plea agreement. In exchange for his cooperation in identifying the full extent of the network and assisting in property recovery, prosecutors reduced some charges. Even with the agreement, Hartford received a 12-year prison sentence for trafficking stolen goods, conspiracy, and operating a criminal enterprise. The sentencing hearing revealed the profound impact of Hartford's crimes. Museum directors testified about the loss of irreplaceable historical objects and the erosion of public trust in their institutions. Community members spoke about feeling violated by the theft of items that represented their shared heritage. The economic cost was measured not just in the market value of stolen objects, but in the resources required to improve security, investigate losses, and restore public confidence. Michael Rhodes faced sentencing in September 2018. His cooperation with investigators, his lack of prior criminal history, and testimony about the psychological manipulation he had experienced resulted in a more lenient sentence than he might otherwise have received. The judge sentenced Rhodes to 5 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 3 years, acknowledging both his culpability and the circumstances that had made him vulnerable to Hartford's recruitment. Throughout these proceedings, a question lingered in the background of the legal process. What role should be publicly acknowledged for Emma Taylor, Noah Bennett, and Sophia Carter? The 3 children had initiated the investigation that led to these prosecutions. Their observations and documentation had provided the foundation for the entire case. Yet recognizing their contribution raised concerns about their safety, their privacy, and the message such recognition might send to other young people. Detective Sullivan, Rebecca Palmer, and the children's parents engaged in careful discussions about how to handle this sensitive issue. The children themselves had mixed feelings about public attention. They had been motivated by curiosity and a sense that something wrong needed to be made right, not by desire for recognition. But their actions had undeniably made a significant difference in their community and beyond. The resolution of this question would come in the case's final chapter, bringing closure to an investigation that had transformed a small town's understanding of crime, justice, and the unexpected ways that ordinary citizens, even children, could contribute to making their communities safer and more just. January 15, 2019. Nearly 10 months after Catherine Morrison discovered the theft at the Ashland Historical Museum, community leaders gathered for a ceremony that would acknowledge the remarkable conclusion of the Heritage Theft Network investigation. The event, held at the renovated museum that had implemented extensive new security measures, brought together law enforcement officials, museum professionals, educators, and citizens who had followed the case with fascination. The recovered gold coins had been returned to their display case, now protected by advanced security technology that included motion sensors, reinforced glass, and real-time monitoring by a professional security firm. The museum had used insurance proceeds and community donations to upgrade its entire security infrastructure, transforming itself from a vulnerable target into a model of small institution security practices. Detective Patrick Sullivan stood before the assembled crowd and provided a comprehensive review of the investigation. He detailed the initial challenges, the frustrating lack of evidence, and the breakthrough that came from an unexpected source. When he acknowledged the role that 3 elementary school students had played in solving the case, the audience responded with sustained applause. Emma Taylor, Noah Bennett, and Sophia Carter, now 6th-grade students at Ashland Middle School, sat with their families in the front row. They had been consulted extensively about how much public attention they were comfortable receiving. The decision had been made to recognize their contribution without sensationalizing their role or creating a narrative that might encourage other young people to pursue potentially dangerous activities. The Ashland Police Department presented the 3 students with civilian commendations for extraordinary community service. The citations acknowledged their powers of observation, their methodical approach to documenting evidence, and their judgment in bringing their findings to responsible adults rather than attempting to confront suspects directly. The recognition emphasized that their success had come from working within appropriate channels and prioritizing safety. Catherine Morrison spoke about the impact the theft had on the museum and the community. She described the feelings of violation and loss that had accompanied the discovery of the empty display case. She explained how the recovery of the stolen coins and the prosecution of those responsible had provided a sense of closure and justice. But she also emphasized the ongoing work required to rebuild trust and ensure that such a crime would not happen again. The museum director revealed that the institution had implemented new policies regarding employee access, security protocols, and oversight of valuable collections. Background checks for all employees had been enhanced. No single individual would have administrative access to security systems. Regular audits of collections would be conducted by independent evaluators. These measures represented lessons learned from a painful experience. The ceremony included recognition for Rebecca Palmer, whose willingness to take her students seriously and facilitate their contact with law enforcement had been crucial to the case's resolution. The teacher had demonstrated the kind of supportive mentorship that could channel youthful curiosity into productive outcomes while maintaining appropriate boundaries and safety considerations. Educational institutions throughout Oregon had begun incorporating the case into curricula about citizenship, critical thinking, and community engagement. The story of 3 students who noticed details that adults had overlooked provided a powerful teaching tool about the value of careful observation and the importance of speaking up when something seems wrong. However, educators were careful to frame these lessons appropriately. The emphasis was placed on the students' decision to work with trusted adults and law enforcement, rather than taking risks themselves. The narrative was presented as an example of effective collaboration between young citizens and established institutions, not as encouragement for amateur detective work that might place children in danger. The recovered artifacts from Hartford's network had been returned to their respective institutions throughout the region. Museums in Eugene, Portland, Sacramento, and smaller communities held their own ceremonies marking the return of stolen items. Each event reinforced public awareness about the importance of protecting cultural heritage and the devastating impact that theft has on communities that value their history. The broader impact of the case extended into law enforcement practices. Multiple jurisdictions implemented new protocols for investigating thefts from cultural institutions. The Heritage Theft Network case had demonstrated how criminals could exploit small museums with limited security resources. Regional law enforcement agencies established information-sharing networks to identify patterns that might indicate organized theft operations. Insurance companies that covered museum collections revised their policies, requiring enhanced security measures and regular security audits as conditions of coverage. While these changes increased costs for small institutions, they also reduced vulnerability to theft and lowered long-term insurance premiums by decreasing risk. The case had lasting effects on the individuals most directly involved. Emma Taylor developed an interest in criminal justice that would eventually lead her to pursue studies in forensic science. Noah Bennett's talent for pattern recognition and attention to detail would serve him well in various academic pursuits. Sophia Carter continued developing her photography skills, using her camera to document community life and social issues. For the Ashland community, the case became a point of pride, tempered with important lessons. The town had experienced a significant crime, but had also demonstrated resilience, cooperation, and the ability to achieve justice through proper channels. The involvement of 3 young students had reminded adults that valuable perspectives and observations could come from unexpected sources. Detective Patrick Sullivan reflected on how the case had changed his approach to investigations. He acknowledged that the fresh perspectives and unencumbered observations of the 3 students had revealed connections that experienced investigators had missed. The case reminded him that sometimes being too close to a problem or too constrained by assumptions about how crimes should be investigated could create blind spots that others might penetrate. As the ceremony concluded and attendees moved through the museum's renovated galleries, the gold coins gleamed in their secure display case, silent witnesses to a remarkable story of crime and resolution. The objects themselves were valuable, but the lessons learned from their theft and recovery proved even more precious to a community that had been tested and had emerged stronger. The case of the Heritage Theft Network, initiated by the curiosity and persistence of 3 elementary school students, had demonstrated that justice sometimes arrives from unexpected directions, that careful observation matters, and that even the youngest members of a community can make meaningful contributions to the common good when they combine courage with wisdom and work together with trusted adults to address wrongs that need to be made right.